Real quick, before we get started, I want to give a shout out to the sponsor of this podcast, Greenlight.ai. We all know how important compliance is, and Greenlight.ai is the leader for compliance and EOR services, especially for talent platforms. You're going to hear about them later, but thank you to Greenlight. All right, Anurag, thank you so much for hopping on. So listen, there's a couple things that, and this is like 6 months in the making, by the way. Let me just put my charger. This is like, what, 6 months in the making, maybe even like 6 years in the making. But right, there's a couple things that for you listeners out there, I just want to make sure we mention this from the start. So you have been building this for 9+ years, right? And you come from a Deloitte background. So this wasn't like a fresh college kid saying, wow, look at talent marketplace. So that's one angle we're going to hit on, is literally just your experience, your background, how you got to here. Second is you're sitting in what I would say is the best region in the world, meaning Singapore. And so we're directly going to hit on your favorite hawker center, what you're doing this weekend. But the reason I bring up Singapore is, I mean, we were just talking in the pre-show, but these regions actually have the highest growth and the highest viability. So if you are a US and Europe company, we are seeing a lot of US companies saying we need to get to Asia. And not to get too technical, Anurag, but you guys kind of crushed not getting into too much debt when it came to COVID. So you had really good reserves. And I think that's part of what's driving it, as well as just the cultural and learning and education environment. One quick story, Anurag. I'll never forget when I went to NUS, National University of Singapore. It was now flipped, where if you were a Singaporean and you didn't get into NUS, then you had to go to the US versus US first. So it's a really, really cool time. But so most important, thanks for hopping on. And let's do, Anurag, I just want to do a quick little boring corporate intro of yourself.
All right, thanks for having me on. Yeah, really excited for the chat. So yeah, as you said, I sort of had a career before Outsize. So, and actually, I co-founded the business with Nicholas, and both of us had those sort of relatively traditional, career paths. Both of us, I started in financial services, working for big corporate financial services. Did that for over 10 years, then went into consulting. Nicholas, my co-founder, was in banking across Europe, and then in consulting, and then private equity. So relatively sort of, traditional sectors and traditional careers. But both of us had a lot of experience in what I call project-based work, like execution-focused work. So non sort of BAU roles. So always like building things, launching things, creating things, new products, new services. Yeah, execution project-based work, whether that was in corporate or consulting or in PE. And both of us had a lot of experience operating in Asia, Africa. And what I loved in corporate life was building businesses. I'd got an opportunity to try and build businesses in a corporate environment. But having done that for over 10 years, that's tiring, right? It takes forever when you're on version 20 of the board deck, right? To get 250K signed off for a pilot, doing that again and again and again gets tiring. So then I went into consulting. I was like, hey, let me move quicker. Let me work in consulting and build businesses for companies, because often they trust consultants more than internal teams, right? So I went into innovation consulting. It was amazingly exciting, built some really cool propositions, but there I found that so much of what we built got left on the shelf. So the first experience was just the lack of speed of getting things over the line through board and then scaling. And then in consulting, it was lack of control to see those things through, and so much getting left on the shelf. And I was like, right, let me just build something of my own, right? Let me just go and build my own business, because that's what I've always wanted to do. And so Nicholas and I sort of came to the same point in our careers where we were like, we want to do something of our own. We'd done some work together and cross paths while he was at Leapfrog Investments, a PE firm he worked for, and I was at Market Gravity, an innovation consulting firm. We both left our roles and then joint forces to build Outsized. Yeah, and yeah, we've been running for 10 years. So we weren't those fashionable founders who came up with a product, went to market, raised millions of dollars, and exit in 2 years. But that was never really the plan. For us at our stage, what we wanted to do was build a business that sustained for the long term. We weren't in a rush. We wanted to build a business that was cash flow positive, was profitable, it was built on sound, unit economics from sort of day one,
Yeah.
rather than try and rush and chase a valuation. So we've sort of never been in a rush, and just still enjoying the journey now, 10 years on.
So can we go back 10 years ago? Because this was what, 2015,
Yeah,
and the Upwork merger hadn't even happened. So it was just Elance and Odesk, right? There was no public companies. I guess the only equivalent would be like monster.com, maybe was your kind of comparable.
yeah,
What's interesting though is a lot of the leading platforms now did start at that time because they were specialized enough, but then also very, very flexible. So just like venture was not going towards flexible talent, right? Or freelance talent just wasn't a thing. We had a blip in like 2019 to 2023 where investors were like, whoa, we love this. And we lost all our money. But so bring us back to 2015.
yeah,
What was that like? Why did you start this business? What did your parents say? What did your partner say? Right? Like,
yeah,
I never told this on like when I started freelancing, I was faking like I was in an MBA so that people thought I was working, but I was really going to the coffee shop and freelancing.
yeah,
No
yeah.
one understood it. But bring us back. What was life like in 2015?
Yeah, sure. So look, I mean, the decision to set up a business was, for me, everyone was just like, "What are you doing?" Right? You're at a critical stage of your career. You're having success. Like, why are you doing this now? Isn't this a huge risk? And oddly, I'd never seen it as a risk because I thought, well, actually, I've built up 15 years of expertise and knowledge and network. If this doesn't work out, it's sort of a free hit. I can always go back onto that path.
Yeah.
So I never had that fear of, hey, this a crazy risk. So I had that confidence in sort of just going and taking a hit. And look, the idea of the business came from our own experiences of trying to execute complex work in complex markets across Asia, Africa. So we would come to these markets and have to build a business or execute a project, and we found it really difficult, right? So we'd come to market and we're like, right, how do we build a team to execute, right? We found that we had two options. We either had to go to a big consulting firm, right, who obviously have a lot of value to add, but weren't always the right answer, right? When you got into deep execution, we weren't always looking for a big consulting firm. And then the other option was perm hiring, right? And perm hiring in Asia Africa was just broken. And from my perspective, continues to be broken, right? It takes, way too long. You could be running 6 months before you get anyone in your company. It costs you a lot. You offer a role, 2 days before they're supposed to join, people don't turn up, and you get all sorts of random CVs being sent to you by recruiters, and it's just very painful, high risk, high cost, lots of time, right? So I found like permanent hiring doesn't work and doesn't make sense from an execution point of view, like an agile execution. Big consulting firms aren't always the right answer. And the only alternative was like word of mouth. It was like literally you would phone up someone and say, hey, Matt, do you know a data scientist? Do you know a project manager? Do you know someone that, is an expert in this system? And you'd literally use your network and then trust someone's recommendation and bring someone in to come and execute. And again, that didn't really work, right? That wasn't a really sustainable model. So like, wow, this is crazy. Like, where's the independent sector? Literally, we'd ask ourselves, like, where's this independent sector? And the reason we'd ask that was because having built my career in the UK and then also done a lot of work in the US, and Nicholas had worked a lot in Europe as well, we found that there was a really mature independent sector. Like at my corporate, we'd always have high skilled contractors and independents we'd work with. And so I was like, well, where are these people, right? And what I found in Asia Africa was that the independent market was essentially either your sort of what I call like your evening and weekend side hustlers, right? People doing sort of relatively transactional skills, on the side in the evenings and weekends, like moonlighting. Or it was like very senior advisory board folks, right? like 30, 40-year professionals, right? There was no, practitioner segment, between 5 and 20 years, like no one was operating as an independent. Right? And essentially we said that's got to change, right? There's no way that can sustain. And, I can talk to you a bit about why we believe that and the bets that we made, but that's really where the problem statement came. Now, interestingly, when we first came to market, we actually said, well, the independent sector doesn't exist, right? So we're going to have to build that up from scratch. Right? So we started out also working with boutiques, so like specialist small firms, because what we found was that individuals would create little, 20, 30 people boutique firms and operate as smaller firms. And there was this nice ecosystem of smaller firms popping up. And that was actually how we sort of leveraged, navigated the early stages where the independent market was just so nascent that even if you wanted to build a high skilled marketplace, to do that was just, very different. You weren't matching the existing market. You had to create the market. So that's where we started.
So let's double click on the 5 to 15 year, because I think this is a very interesting point. When we look at freelance flexible work historically, it was kind of like the dumbbell, where you had a lot of older executives that rather than retiring would open up their boutique advisories, right? And then you had the bottom, where it was a bunch of ICs, individual contributors, that were incredible at software development, writing, you name it, but usually, I don't say task based, but like
Yeah.
single things. Now, the 5 to 15 year individual, this is, so actually was briefed yesterday, Anurag. So one of my sort of venture investor groups, and this is on the HR tech executive side, one of the number or the top 3 trends was middle management getting gutted. And if we look at most of the layoffs happening right now, it is in that middle management. Now, who's the middle management? Usually it's the 10 and ideally the 15 plus year. But what really hit me was when I think about how the 5 to 15 year sort of leader, what they want, they don't want to deal with the traditional corporate structure. Meaning, when I want to drive impact, I don't want to have to open up headcount, get all these recs, get this budget. I just want to make an impact. And this is where, if you look at the independent path, it's more fluid, it's more agile, and they might start, working this way on the side and then go, oh my God, I can get paid more. I have more security and I'm making more of an impact to my clients. So all that to say that yes, the 5 to 15 year individual is finally going independent. But tell us, was that
Yes.
always the start? And yeah.
So I'll talk to you. So there's some really important segment decisions we made, right? First of all, geography, right? We chose markets where this model was non-existent or nice, like completely on base, right? But that meant there was a huge opportunity, right, to sort of build something in these markets, but also a big problem to solve and a complex problem to solve. But I always have a view, if you solve a complex problem, you usually get rewarded for it if you manage to do it well, right? So a geographic choice was a big choice. Then it was around the client segment. We chose enterprise, big companies, right? Not SMEs, not startups, right? Not small growth companies, right? That was a second demand side choice. Then there was the talent segment choice. We chose practitioners, that 5 to 15. And that was really important because we were like, that doesn't exist, but that's got to exist, right? And then it was the type of work. Gigs existed, and independent existed in certain skills, tech and creative, but it didn't exist across the skills life cycle. So we said we're going to go broad on skills and we're going to go for bigger projects, right? 3, 6, 9 month full-time engagements, not task-based, not gig-based, right? So there were some really important segment choices we made on the 5 to 15. So I'll give you a bit of anecdote. So when we came to market and we used to speak to people, and it's I still feel it now, is in these markets, more than I'd say anywhere else, there is a really interesting emotional relationship between people and their company and their employer and people in their work. And it's very cultural, right? Essentially, people's identities are intrinsically linked to their company, to who they work for, right? So when we used to ask someone 10 years ago in India, say, hey, tell me about yourself, the first thing they tell you after their name is who they work for. And the reason for that is because who you work for will define so many things. It will define your social status, your self-worth, right? Your value. It's where you get your security. It's where you get your confidence from, right? So the answer to that question, who do you work for? And that's why that's usually the first question people ask you as well. Who do you work for, right? Because the answer to that question will define, are you someone worth talking to, basically, right? Are you someone of value? So people had this very deep emotional connection, and there was very much an attitude of, hey, the company gives you security, right? And therefore, it's all about accumulating years of service, longevity, right? Job title, right? So it's accumulating bigger job titles, bigger teams, years of service. And it was about security. My company gives me security. And there's a deep emotional dependent relationship between the two. The other thing is, historically, it's a very hierarchical relationship, right? The power dynamics are very much, employee, will deliver, give everything they can. And for that, they get a job and security, right? But it's very much like there's a power dynamic there. There's a hierarchical difference. It's not a peer-to-peer partnership, right? There is a hierarchy of relationship there. So that was super interesting to me because I was like, wow, there's such a deep emotional connection. But is that emotional connection equal? And I always find it really interesting on unequal relationships from a connection point of view. It's a bit like sport fans and their teams, right? The teams, the football players in the Premier League, right? Who get paid millions of pounds, right? They don't have a clue who you are. They don't know your life. They don't understand you, right? But you will be in tears, right? You will be deeply emotionally affected if anything happens to your players, to your team, right? So there's a slight mismatch of an emotional relationship. So I found this to be fascinating. And what we've seen, though, is a really interesting shift in that, right? And there's been an interesting number of drivers for that, right? One of the drivers was that myth of, hey, this is a relationship for life. I can rely on this security. A permanent job is secure. Got busted by retrenchments, right? By redundancies. So that was the first thing that started to happen, which was previously was like, if you don't have a perm job, it means that you're not very good. If you get made redundant, it means you're not very good, right? But now actually you could be great at what you do, but you could still lose your job in a minute. That deep emotional connection is great. You could do 10 years of service, you come into the office and your card might not work, and that's it, you're done, right? So that was quite jarring for people. They're like, oh my God, like I was so dependent on this one income stream and this one relationship, and I put all my life and time into this, and in a moment it's ended, right? And that's not saying companies are evil. That's just saying businesses made business decisions, right? This doesn't make sense for us anymore. So therefore, we have to make these commercial decisions. But I'm not sure how individuals were seeing it in that commercial route. They were seeing it as an emotional relationship, right? So I think that was one jarring impact. The second thing was there's a shift around people's desire to have more control in an uncertain world, right? People said, well, if security isn't a certainty, let me take back some control, right? And control my own destiny. And COVID accelerated that for sure, right? Which was, I want to now, I am more confident in my skill. I want to choose who I work with, the work that I do. I want to value my time more. I don't want to passively run through my career. I want to decide, right, the work that I do. So that was a big change in mentality, and a bit more like people reflected on their relationship with work and wanted to take more control of it. And that led to people saying, hey, I should have more of a connection to my skill. I should focus on accumulating skills and knowledge to secure myself, right? That's how I'll become secure. So people started shifting from accumulating years of service and job titles to accumulating skills and knowledge, right? And I think that was a big shift. So now when we speak to people and say, tell us about yourself, the really interesting changes is now, hey, my name is, and I am a, strategy, expert, and I currently work for, right, or I currently work with. So the skill has moved up in the hierarchy. So I am my skill over I am my company. And also, I have to invest in my own brand identity, right? And create my own security. So I think these have been some of the emotional shifts that have happened on the independent side. And there's also a lot more cultural change. So before, if you went home and said, I'm an independent, I'm a freelancer, people say, oh my God, that means you couldn't get a job. Like, what happened, right? That's what your family would say. But now it, and then you'd say, how many years of service, how many years have you worked for this company? Oh, 20 years. Oh, that's amazing. That's great. If you now say to someone, I've worked for the same company for 10 years, they're like, oh, okay, that's a bit odd. Like, why haven't you done more things, right? Why haven't you actually worked for different things? Why haven't you got a broader range of experience? And if you say you're an independent, they're like, wow, you must be really good at what you do to be able to be an independent, right? That's so aspirational. Wow, you've got so much control, right? You get to, so it's becoming more aspirational. It's becoming more accepted, but it's still on a journey, right? It's not there yet in these markets. There's still a big journey, but it's starting to shift for sure.
So it hits home. So I wish we had met in 2019 because in 2020 I did the dumbest thing ever, which was start a company in Singapore for freelancers and going around with Singaporean, Chinese, Australian investors. It was still looked at as, oh, they're unemployed.
Yeah,
Whereas in the US at that time, it was like, it was a shock to me, right? I was like, oh man, I just spent 2 years at Microsoft where people already know that freelance is a thing. And now, so totally relate to that. We would always hear it was, well, the iron rice bowl was always the thing, right? Like, why would you give up the iron rice bowl? Then followed by the social implications of, is it the five C's where it's like, what makes you a viable mate? And it's like, you got the car, the credit card, the condo, right? And it's like, wow, freelancing doesn't give you iron rice or that. Now, to your point, it actually totally does. It's just it's going through that evolution. Now, there's a book I wanted to see if I still have it or if it's oh, okay, here we go, here we go. So, one of the books that so did you ever have to read this?
no, I haven't.
Okay, so like every MBA and business school is trained on Toyota, right?
Right.
And Lean and Six Sigma, and they fall in love with Toyota. What they don't really talk about is that those employees never leave. And so this, I think one of the things we're going through right now is and it really plays in on the 5 to 15 year sort of independent executive that you want, because part of what we're going through is literally just what worked 10 years ago isn't really working today. And so the Toyota way, we were all trained on it. It doesn't really work today. You can't plan these things out. There isn't lifetime loyalty. And it's tough, right? We're in the mix of that chasm where it's like some are doing really well, but it's a small sample. So I kind of want to dive into what you're seeing in terms of companies
Yeah,
and individuals that are really leaning into this and doing well.
yeah,
And one thing I know that's going to be fascinating from you is within the companies that are doing well, who is taking the lead? Because we also, as an industry, we're not this standard repeatable transformation with a set defined playbook. We don't have one buyer. The champion usually is taking a big risk. But so who's doing it well right now, Anurag?
yeah. No, that's a great point. So I think it's a good time to shift on that side because the shift in individuals moving to the independent sector needed two things to happen. One, infrastructure to exist, right? The world in these markets isn't built for an independent, right? It's like, cars are, the world isn't built for a family of five, right? The world's built for a family of four. It's like the world isn't built for an independent, it's built for a permanent employee. So a lot of infrastructure needed to be built, right? And then the other thing was there needed to be demand, right? You need opportunities because that's what will drive the market. So the good thing for us is as the talent side was emerging and growing, the demand side was shifting as well. And what was moving was organizations were moving, and it was really market drivers, which is always what you need, really, right? You need a market driver, which was, hey, market uncertainty. So competitive volatility, right? A challenger company could set up with new technology and compete with your business in moments. So you don't know when your company is going to get disrupted. So you've got to be agile, right? There could be some financial shock. So you want to move away from fixed cost, right? There could be some, economic, social, political disruption, right? So companies realize that having fixed cost, fixed capability, acquiring loads of, because in these markets, success for a big company was how many. Essentially, it was like, can I own the talent, right? That was a competitive game. It was like, I'm just going to hire all the best people and put them in big offices, right? And it was like, hey, that can't work anymore because the skills we need today may not be the skills we need in 6 months or in 9 months. So if we hire it all now, when the market changes against us, we've then got to fire and hire, right? And that's why you were going through lots of those risks. So it was like, okay, we need a different model, right? We need an agile, flexible capability model. And I don't know if this resonates with you, but when we did some research, we looked at US and UK and European markets, and we looked at it, we sort of thought that it looked like between 20 and 30% of a big enterprise high skilled workforce in those markets was flexible, roughly, right? Around that 20. In Asia, Africa, it was like 2%, right? 1, 2, 3%. So we were like, this is going to have to shift, right? In that high skill segment. So we saw that market change, right? Companies were like, we have to change. So it was a market competitive commercial driver. And then obviously a cost driver, right? Hey, we can't sit here with this fixed cost. So both on the capabilities needing to be agile and the cost base needing to be variable, shifted the model. And what we started to see was this really started to become a C-suite discussion. So it started to become a strategic discussion at C-suite level, right? Very much business driven, right? So it was like C-suite saying, hey, we need to change the way that we execute, build capabilities, right? Think about our human capital, our capabilities, right? And the baton was passed to finally the CHRO, right? The hardworking CHRO that's been, unfortunately, a lot of times seen as a transactional role, right? Hey, do some fun things with people, pay people, onboard people, offboard people, and keep us people compliant, right? And do some value proposition stuff, right? That keeps people happy, right? They got a proper seat at the table. It's like, hey, now help us. We need to change our model, right? For thinking about how we build. So it was a great moment, I think, for HR leaders to actually say, wow, I'm now absolutely been given the remit to drive change within this organization. So senior talent and HR leaders were definitely given that challenge to say, how are we going to change, right? But while they were thinking about that strategic solution, business stakeholders, as they always do, are like, I just need to solve problems on the ground today. So they just started going and started using any model that they could, right? Let me try this, let me try that, let me find this partner, let me find that partner. So in general, we found that what started to work really well, which was a centrally defined archetype, like a model for how the organization were going to think about independent talent, think about a independent talent value proposition. How do we find talent? How do we engage talent? How do we onboard talent? How do we work with talent, right? And then, though, a freedom for business stakeholders to just be quick, right? To not control business stakeholders, to go and find the partners they wanted to work with, find the talent they wanted to work with, get them in the business, and then own the execution of that work. So those are the models that we found successful. The ones that were purely centrally run, which was the business, you can't do anything until we've come up with this very defined central strategy and operating model and SOPs. It just took too long, they just were never able to get their models off the ground because it just went into too much process and bureaucracy. So they just took too long. And then the ones that were purely business driven, where HR was treated as transactional, they also didn't work because what would happen was you'd get speed on the front end, but then you'd get stuck on the execution, which was, hey, now I need to actually pay this person and onboard this person and give them a laptop and then it would all fall over. So HR were treated as transactional people, and that model didn't work. So business completely driving it didn't work. Central HR talent driving it and owning it didn't work. But a partnership of here are the defined SOPs and archetypes and business model. Now business, you go and execute, right? And we'll help you with the infrastructure side. So that's a very high level, view of it.
So you literally just described the human cloud model, meaning that it is centrally invested and centrally prioritized and strategic, but decentrally just allowed to hire, to scale, to run. And the centralized part is mostly around the risk, actually,
Yeah.
and the empowerment. And so
Yeah.
the business leader does not care about platforms or talent. They just care about getting the work done.
Exactly.
So they don't want to do the hard work of, putting up an RFP, doing all the due diligence, finding all the platforms. And the HR leaders actually really do care when they can nerd out and sort of act like they're doing a vendor analysis and that whatever. The second is the risk, right? So the business leaders also, kind of like every business leader, we just want to know the rules. We don't necessarily
Yeah.
want the perfect rules.
Yeah.
And so the centralized says, okay, here's the risk tolerance you can have. Yes, they can work on IP, but not in this area.
Yeah.
Yes, they can have access to files, but not wholesale access to the full, SharePoint environment. And when you hit $1 million doing this, then let's have a talk and maybe we'll go to level 2 risk, right? So there's
Yeah.
like this beautiful planning. Now you bring up a really important point, which is, and this is also dovetailing into how Asia is potentially leapfrogging the world in many different areas, but especially talent. So what we've seen is that the best programs take a white piece of paper approach. Now, to your point of like the 20% in the US, so what we see is 50 to 70% of the best US companies are external. Now, external counts as temp to hire, contractors,
All those sectors.
agencies, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Now, usually like between 70 and 90% of that is unmanaged, meaning that there is an MSP, there is a VMS, but business leaders are fighting to go outside of that, right? It's pretty archaic now. And so all the problems that full time had is now happening in the external. And we actually say it's the same, whether it's internal, external. If traditional, then it's kind of the same thing. And it's usually like full time default. So, like the temp to hire, right? We're like, so you're looking for a full time person and you're just trying to, retrofit them. So, the white piece of paper says, instead of copying the VMS or MSP landscape, or instead of copying the contingent talent program, this is net new. And when they meet people like you, Anurag, and they meet the incredible, individuals that are on the Outsize platform, they go, holy crap, yeah, why would we ever try to stick this under our current MSP or under our current VMS? Now, we have seen partnerships, right? But we haven't seen them validate to actually be real. So, to your point, this white piece of paper approach is where by far the best success happens. And since in Asia, you haven't been burdened by already leaning in to spending $1 to $5 billion a year on your current external program, you have a lot more room to be nimble.
Yeah.
I always use the example when I'm speaking where it's like, I ask leaders, I'm like, hey, we go out to dinner tonight in your region. How are we paying? Are we using a credit card? All right. Well, in Asia, you look like an idiot because you're maybe using this and pretty soon you're using this, right? And so I think with the talent landscape, Asia's also seeing that. What are you seeing as massive success stories in terms of type of projects, type of industries? Because one thing that's very unique about you, Anurag, is you prioritize the project rather than the skill set. I think that's a small but crucial difference because the skills will always be changing,
Yeah.
but the actual outcomes are what's crucial. But so what are you seeing right now? Like what's top of mind in terms of projects that need to get done, projects that are working, not working? If you want to throw the AI into this aspect, right? Because I'm so glad 34 minutes and we haven't said it yet, but this
I
might be
know,
where it
right?
comes out.
I know.
But what's really working, would you say?
So look, I think what's really interesting is, first of all, the use cases are changing, right? So previously, when you talk to companies about independents or freelancers, they always had in their minds, yeah, I can use them for like one-off projects, and I can use them as individual contributors in that project team, right? And I can use them for these niche skills, right? That I don't necessarily want to hire, and I don't need a lot of that skill, right? I need this one skill, this one seat in this project that I can't fill. I'll bring in an independent, and they'll help me execute. That was an accepted use case, right? Where that is really interestingly evolving is, hey, a squad, right? A team of independents, right? I can actually build a delivery team of multi-skilled independents, right? Who can work together to deliver me a much larger piece of work, right? So we're seeing the deal size, right, for projects increase for independents, right? And so that, if you think about where maybe a big consulting firm would have played right down into that long tail, I think what we're seeing is independents are starting to take up a larger part of that long tail of smaller projects. So instead of just being a small individual for 3 to 6 months, it can be, hey, I can bring in 4 or 5 people for 12 months to deliver a larger piece of work, right? So that's one interest. So that was always a use case, but now we're seeing project teams, and that's a super interesting evolution. The second one then is, and this is one I get excited about, which is, it's not just thinking about project delivery, but capability building. So I'll give you an example. Big bank in Southeast Asia, they wanted to run a massive agile transformation program, right? It was a multi-year, whole-scale enterprise agile transformation, right? And it was going to impact every single business function: finance, marketing, technology, distribution, right? Product, it was going to impact every single business area. And previously, what they would have done is they would have essentially gone and hired, right, a massive team of agile, right, to build this agile team, right? They wanted to build this central, and that would have taken them, a couple of years to build that capability out, right? Or they would have gone to a big consulting firm and they would have got them in and run them. But what we were able to do for them was essentially build them, right, their transformation, right, program, which was made up of 3 layers of talent, right? One layer was your fractional senior executive level agile transformation expert. So this is your ex-COO, ex-CTO, ex-CFO that worked in massive banks during agile transformation programs that could give you the scars of what it was like to be a C-suite, stakeholder driving an agile transformation in your function. These individuals were sitting on their steering committee, advising and coaching the senior executive team, right? 1 or 2 days, right, a month, 1 to 5 days a month. Underneath that, you had your program leaders, right? Your senior program management team. These are the ones defining and running the program, right? Heavyweight, 15-year, 20-year, hardened program delivery, right, experts, right? And then underneath that, you had agile practitioners, 5 to 10 years experience, agile coaches, agile project managers, scrum experts that were on the ground full-time working with teams, rolling things out, right? So essentially 3 pools of talent delivering a single program, right? So that was really super interesting to me in terms of how to build capability, right? If you take another example, we had an FMCG client wanted to build a data team, right? An in-house data team. And they were like, previously, we know that we've done the capacity assessment. We think this data team needs to be about 30, 40 people strong, right? To deal with the business demand. Previously, we would have hired 40 people, right? Because that's where the peak of the demand is. But actually, in our new strategic focus on agile workforce model, and this is actually one of their strategic, it says it on their strategy, it says agile workforce is one of their strategic objectives over the next 5 years. They said, well, what we'll do is we'll build a central core team of 10 who will own our IP, that will really understand the business deeply. Then we'll use a outsized, right, talent pool, a bench built by Outsize, which is essentially a pool of independents, right, that they can use to ramp that team up and down, right? So now that team of 30 can become a team of 30 when you need it to be, but can come back to a team of 10 when you don't need, the scale. So it's creating those flexible capability functions. So now I don't need to just think about independence as in tech skills or creative skills or just a project. I can actually rethink how I build every team, how I build my marketing team, my technology team, my operations team, my data team, my strategy team. And that's actually what we're interested in building. We're not absolutely will help you find an independent, deliver a piece of work, right? What I'm really interested in doing is helping you build your independent workforce, help you build a parallel workforce, right? That for me is the exciting problem to solve, where I envisage a future where you've got a really efficient core of permanent talent that is with you, that understands your business and your market deeply. And then you supplement that with a really flexible, right, workforce around it that you bring in on an on-demand basis, right, to deliver the needs of the day, right, to align with the demands of the business. And that's what I'm excited about, where this could go. Yeah.
Hey everyone, real quick, I want to talk about the risk that is involved with an independent workforce. No matter where you are, whether it's the US, whether it's Brazil, whether it's the EU, whether it's London, there is risk in how you classify and how you work with individuals. Unfortunately, it's not as easy as just paying someone. The classification, the actual collaboration, the contracts, the payments, everything is intertwined and must be connected in a way that doesn't get you in trouble with the tax authorities, regulatory authorities, and even potentially class action lawsuits. There are numerous examples of this. Just search classification lawsuit on wherever you want to use, and you'll get plenty. Which is why today's sponsor, Greenlight.ai, is the modern EOR, modern compliance solution for the modern workforce. There's 4 things that we want to call out when hiring an independent worker that you need. And that is, you need to onboard, you need to classify, you need to send payments, and you need to manage this global workforce. It's more than just one person, and Greenlight has all of that covered. All right, I want you to head over to greenlight.ai and tell them Human Cloud sent you. So it's interesting because you mentioned the deal size increasing, and what cracks me up is increasing, but also back to flexibility, because the total deal size might be larger. The difference is if it's not working, you can cut it after a month, you can adjust really quickly. And so it's that adaptability, right? The
Yeah.
total deal size might be still 1.5 million, but it might get done in 6 months versus 6 years. Or after a month, you say, boy, did we just validate that we shouldn't be doing this. And I'm not going to lie, Anurag, that's what cracks me up about most big consulting is the deal is made in a way that mostly is good for one side, right? And if it's like, hey, we're doing a vendor analysis, okay, but most business things don't, right? They need
Yeah.
to adapt really quickly right now. So you mentioned that the leveling and the layers. This is where I think over the past 5 years, so technology is always bundling and unbundling, right? Like it's just always this constant phase, and it's like, look at all this technology and Microsoft Office, right? Look at all this technology and Salesforce. So we've been in this stage where we now have 330 million freelancers globally. In the US, we're about to have over half our workforce be independent. And these numbers look big and sexy, right? But from the company side, that looks like chaos, and
Yeah.
that looks like an unbundled market. And I'm going to get in trouble, right?
Yeah.
If I even try to do this, because it looks like more work than just the work itself. But what you're hitting on is we are bundling. right? And whether it's consolidation of platforms, whether it's the actual strategic workforce planning of building vetted talent pools, that's exactly what you're doing. And it cracks me up because I think as a leader, we literally just want to always look to what can build that outcome for us. And so we always say, and sort of this is going to be sort of our last question coming up, but one of the examples we always use is, and we just did a big workshop for 100 plus executives, and we always give a white piece of paper and we say, write down what you're most struggling with because there's going to be a flexible talent solution for that. And a lot of times this one always works. And that is every single leader is struggling to get what's in here out. And if you think about it from like a traditional mindset, you would say, ooh, I have to have a chief of staff. Am I professional enough to have a chief of staff? How much is that going to cost? But the capabilities are document what I'm learning, meaning take all my meetings, take my keynotes, yada, 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 find a way to document, structure that, find exhausts, put articles, things like podcasts, things like keynotes, start to design that stuff. And then you see this beautiful assembly line of a leader being able to drive, whether it's their internal teams, their external teams, you name it. But that's the capabilities mindset, right? Rather than just, I need a chief of staff.
Yeah.
So my last question for you, Anurag, is what is the one thing that our listeners should do right now? Obviously, they should go to Outsized, but what is that one thing? Should they try to unlock 15K of budget? Should they go look at existing projects happening? Should they look at their own shelf, realize what's not getting shipped? What is that one thing that you would say our audience needs to do right now?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. I think if you think about a startup and a growth company, right? What we'll do before we hire anyone, we'll ask ourselves a question: can technology do this, right? And then two, do we need a permanent person to do this, or can we get a flexible capability in to execute this, right? Because I think being very thinking deeply about what do I need perm, because there's almost a responsibility. As soon as you hire permanently, you've got to have a belief in the long-term sustainability, in my view, of that capability, right? And I think that because no one wants to have to fire 10-20% of their workforce every 2 years, right? So I think that's the first thing. Like, could enterprises place a rule that says, hey, before we hire, we should ask ourselves some critical questions, right? Is this something that we need long term, right? Is there really that long term confidence in this capability? Can I feel the capability in a different way? Or is really the answer a permanent headcount? Like, is it truly a permanent headcount? I think that's one thing. The second thing I'd say is where we find organizations fall over a lot is in a lack of an understanding of the different animal that an independent is versus a permanent employee that they've known very deeply. So they know what the persona of a permanent employee that's currently in their company, that's probably been there for 10, 15 years. They know that person. They know the human being. They know how that ticks. They don't understand as deeply the emerging person that's joining their company and their expectation. And then they've got these independents that are coming in. So you've got this really interesting mix of personas now within a workforce of, my sort of generation of worker that sort of grew up in a very different working environment. You've got a much younger talent base coming in, perm, and then you've got these independents and flexible, talent coming in. An independent thinks very differently about their relationship with you, right? So you can't treat them the same. But everything from how you select and assess, how you pay them, how you work with them, how you assess their performance, all that has to be thought differently. So I think thinking deeply about how you're going to engage with this different persona of talent in your organization is, I think, really important, because we see so many great pieces of work fall over because the organization haven't realized, okay, well, if we treat this individual like this, they're just going to leave, right? So I'll give you a very simple example, right? Can you put an independent through 5 rounds of interviews over a 6 to 8 week process? Well, no, right? Because they're going to have got a project within 2 weeks, right? So the speed of decision making, right? And do you really need to ask them what their future ambition is within your company? Like, no, you don't need to. It's like it's all about assessing them on what have you done? Have you done what we need you to do? But evidence it for me. Tell me how you're going to do it. Show me what you're going to deliver. Okay, great. Let's get started, right? Um,
Yeah.
you don't need to put them through a form like your same performance management process. You don't need to put them through the same computer-based training, right? So you've got to think about all those things, right, that will just make this difficult, right, for the independent and you. And increasingly, we're finding that high-skilled independents are choosing, right? We are getting independents saying, "Who's this project with?" No thanks. I don't really want to work with them. I did a project with them and it was an absolute nightmare. So I think organizations are going to have to start thinking about creating a brand that attracts independent talent. So I think one, rethinking how you build capabilities and moving away from always defaulting to a perm headcount. Two, thinking about your brand and your value proposition for independence and the end-to-end life cycle, right? I mean, again, and really another obvious scenario, right? I mean, clients will talk to us about payment terms, right? And they'll be like, 60-day. And we're like, well, look, but we can't be paying an independent in 90 days, right? I mean, would you be happy if your salaries are paid 90 days? So they're not vendors; these are human beings, right? These are individuals. So we're embedding an early pay solution into our platform, right? So to allow independents to get paid immediately, but this sort of mentality around the value proposition, I think is super important. So those would be some of the things that I would say they're more practical things that an organization can do.
So I really want to double click on the independents are different. And what I want to do is I want to quickly say, no, they're not, but I'll give the context to it. The difference is, in my experience, is that independents want to be working for you. They don't need to be working for you.
It's a
Now,
choice.
the
Yes.
pushback that we hear is, well, everyone that joins my company wants to work here. My answer is talk to them 6 months later, talk to them 2 months later, talk to them 10 years later. So it's not an apples to apples when an employee joins versus an independent joins. It's that 6 months down the road when that employee all of a sudden is sitting there and they're like, well, I don't really want to do this, but I don't want to have to go look for another job,
Yeah.
right? Versus the independent who's going, I love what I'm doing. Look at the impact that I've made. And one quick example, Anurag, that we've seen, especially recently in the past 6 months, is a lot of times independents will actually tell you when they should scale you down, meaning
Yes.
rather than a right. And that is like,
Yeah.
dude, that is the coolest thing because it's kind of like having a breakup talk, but then
Yeah.
never breaking up and instead being like, this is best. It's the coolest thing.
Yeah.
And an employee will never do that, right? Imagine your employee coming to being like, hey, boss, so I think in 2 weeks, you probably should reduce my workload by, 90%. Not because I don't want to work here, but because the business is looking like you need this instead of this.
Such a great point. I love that point because it sort of goes back to this. It's a partnership with an independent. It's a
Yeah.
equal partnership. So they're like, you're my partner. While it makes sense, we work together. And when it doesn't, I've got no expectations beyond that, right? It's very much a partnership for when it works. And your point there was also really powerful around. Sometimes clients say to me, "But how do I know that they could leave me anytime? And how do I know that they care about the work? They could just do they care about delivering a good job because there's no like consequence." I was like, there are more consequences and there's more incentives for an independent to perform than an employee because if they don't perform, they don't get paid, right? If they don't do a good piece of work for you, they're going to struggle to find their next project, right? And they won't leave you if you treat them well because they want to keep working with you because it's much easier for them to continue to do different projects with you than go and. So there's this interesting mentality around, but are they going to do good work? Are they incentivized? Are they bought in? my experience has been they are even more bought in, even more accountable, even more focused on impact and delivery because it's their life, right? It's their lifeline. Like they need to deliver impact. And the reason why they left permanent employment is because they wanted to just come in, cut through the noise and just deliver and then leave, right? And go, I've done what I needed to do. There's no more to be done. I'll go on to my next assignment. So and the increasingly I explain that clients are, oh yeah, okay, that does make a lot of sense actually, right? That does make sense. So a lot of these fears and constraints around, aren't they going to steal my IP? Aren't they just going to leave me? Do they care about doing good work? When you logically explain why none of that actually makes sense, right, as a real bounded risk, right? Um, Organization, oh yeah, actually that was the world that existed when 15, 20 years ago, when it was a bit of the wild west, right? It's no longer that, right? So yeah, I think I love that point around they're the same but, and those different, the way you frame that was really nice in terms of they're
Yeah.
choosing as opposing to needing. I really like that.
And it's pretty simple, right? Like this is my favorite thing is always just like people are like, oh, like why, independent flexible talent? And it's just like in 99% of cases, it's just because it's better. And then they'll be like, in what ways? And I'm like, in the most simple ways possible. Like it just makes sense. And it actually is so simple. And the last thing I'll leave with Anurag. So these past 2 months, I have gone to basically every hackathon possible in most major tech hubs. Now, the reason I've done that is because we see all this data around Gen Z, right? And people coming out of the workforce. And we hear all these things like they're lazy and they're never going to work a job and all these kind of fears. What I can tell you is what I've seen is yes, they might not work like we did, but actually, most of them are actually more just money realistic. The big difference is they do want to work on something that they make an impact and they will go spend, what was it, 72 hours eating just pizza, not sleeping, and hacking on cool projects if they want to do that. And so one of the updates that we've actually made at Human Cloud is our new like sales and marketing team, and feel free to steal this. We call them growth entrepreneurs in residence. And what we say is, we know that you're entrepreneurial. We also know that you need to pay rent. We're going to give you the opportunity to make a massive impact. And in 3 months, if you love Human Cloud and you love the work you're doing, we're going to work with you more. And that more might be your hourly goes up, your retainer goes up, but that's kind of how we're shifting, is rather than kind of like, hey, here's a job, it's you're an entrepreneur in residence. Do what
Yeah,
you will with it. You
yeah,
might want to take over paid ads.
yeah.
Show the impact first. And that's the beauty of a flexible talent and independent workforce, right? It's
No,
like,
that makes sense.
yeah,
And I think one of the things we've seen is before we used to see the talent market as binary. There were the permanent people and there were the independents, right? And never should the two meet, and then they're definitely not the same human being. Now, what I'm finding, I don't know if you see the same, I find people are now just saying, I don't care about the nature of the contract in reality,
yep,
right?
yep,
I'm interested in the work, like, to your point. I'm interested in what am I going to learn? What am I going to have an opportunity to work on? Who am I going to be able to work on that with? And is it of value? And am I going to get some ROI out of it? And to your point, the younger segment, what I am finding is that they're not as willing to, their payback period, their ROI on an investment of time and effort
yep,
is much shorter. Like I might have invested, I'll go, okay, I'll put 5 years into this and then I'll get some, I'll get that role that I should deserve, or I'll get that salary increase, or I'll get that promotion,
yep,
or I'll invest 10 years before I make it type thing, right? I think for them, that feels very alien. It's like, no, I'm gonna invest time now and I'm gonna put everything
yep,
into it, but I expect an ROI on that. And if they don't see the ROI, a quick ROI, I think they're so entrepreneurial. They're such like, they see themselves as their own entities, right? So they're like, almost like I have resources and skills to deploy. Where can I make my bets to get the best return on that investment, right? And I
yep.
think they see it like that, in a way. So they're looking for that. Where is the ROI? And I definitely find there's less there's less of a submissive and culture within the younger segment. They're very much confident around, hey, this is equal. This has to be an equal dialogue, right? So I think there's some of the things that I noticed, but I really like that framing for that Gen Z. You're right. I think they have been bad mouthed quite a lot. I think people are like, hey, do these people even want to work? But I think it's just a very different mentality that people are struggling to understand or work out how to engage them and incentivize them in the right ways.
And that flip, Anurag, is kind of like from the company, from the CEO side, it's like, why should I invest 6 months in you if you have no ROI as well? Yeah. Right? Like, if it's not working a month in, then it's probably not going to work 6 months in, and it sure as hell is not going to work 6 years in. So there's that interesting flip, which it does feel transactional, right? Like that does feel transactional and Darwinian of like, ooh, this company is looking at me, and if there's not an ROI in a month, they're going to cut me. Yeah. But then the individual is looking and saying, ooh, if this isn't worth my time in a month, then I'm going to cut them. So it actually is like this beautiful matching if you let it. Now, if you are the 20-year in middle manager who did put their, got their stripes, put their work in, I don't know what to say besides I just do feel bad for you because right? Like I'm not going to fake and be like, oh, life is going to be so great. Like,
and I think that world really difficult is the people that are working for them don't have the same mentality, and I think they're struggling with that, which is I put it in. Why aren't you willing to put it in? Right?
Yeah.
And I think there's where some of the tensions happening in organizations at the moment, which is
I totally get it. I mean, dude, I have it where when I was in high school, we technically had a coding class, but it wasn't real. And so I have a little anger where I'm like, all right, you little 21-year-old shit. Like, you've been learning about AI since high school. Guess what I was doing? Learning how to type, right? So congrats, you're AI native, but I'm not. So, you know what I mean? Like, so I feel the tension. The difference is, shit, I have to adapt. Right? Like, you're not going to wait for me. My competitor's not going to wait for me to feel bad. So, listen, Anurag, this has actually been one of the longest episodes we've had in a while.
Sorry.
And so,
my team will tell you I am a bit verbose at times. So I do love to talk.
This is awesome, man. So, most important question for our listeners is, where can they find you? Where can they find Outsized?
Yeah, so Outsized, we cover APAC, Africa, Middle East, right? So we have our Australia, New Zealand business, our Southeast Asia business, our India business, Middle East business, and our South Africa business. So these businesses have been running, for years, right? It's been running for 10 years. Each market's been running for 3, 4, 5 years at minimum. So, in terms of growth markets, right? I'd say that, we made a brave choice to build in difficult markets, but I'm really glad we did. But yeah, so if you're a big enterprise, if you're a corporate enterprise, if you're a private equity firm, if you're a big global consulting firm, trying to get complex work done in our markets, then, you will find us. You can contact me, contact any of the Outsized team on LinkedIn, through our website, and we can have an initial conversation. Really enjoyed the chat. Really enjoyed it.
My friend, this is the first of many, and I didn't even ask, where is your favorite Hawker Center and what booth are you going to?
Well, so our office, we're very close to Hong Lim Hawker, and that is a really good one. We really enjoy that. We get out there every so often and have our lunches out there. Have you got a favorite?
Of course, Zion and the dumpling stand. Of course. And where I lived, I was a 7-minute walk if I took a right. And so I'm for you listeners out there, Anurag, I'm going to say that you are sponsoring a happy hour at a Hawker Center. And this is because it's probably not going to go over $50. So, exactly. and we'll sponsor each. Hewlett Packard will sponsor Zion, $50 limit, and then Outsized will sponsor yours, $50 limit. And after $100, we'll have the best meals of our life, and then we'll have a little healthy competition.
Let's do it. I'm in.
Perfect, man. All right. Thank you so much for hopping on, my friend.
Man, appreciate it. Love chatting.